How's it going, everybody? Daner here with North Central Coins, and welcome back to another exciting episode of the most rare and valuable coins in Canada. In today's video, we're counting down 12 of the most wanted Canadian coins that can be worth some buku amounts of money. These are the ones that experienced collectors are always on the lookout for. Some of these pieces have shown up in pocket change, others in coin rolls, coin collections, or even tucked away as old family heirlooms. But one thing they all have in common is that they are worth way more than their face value. From rare airs to low mintage varieties to unappreciated modern coins that have skyrocketed in value, this list will cover some of the most talked about and sought after Canadian coins out there. Whether you're just starting off your coin collecting journey or you've been hunting for years, these are some of the coins that can take your collection to the next level or will surprise you with their immense value. Before we do get into this, I would really appreciate if you guys would smash that thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and also ring that bell notification so you can stay up to date with my new videos as they are being released. And then without any further ado, what do you say we get right into it? These are the top 12 most wanted coins in Canada. Let's get it, guys. If you happen to have any old Canadian pennies tucked away in a jar, buried in a desk, or inherited from a relative, now is the time to pull them out and give them a close inspection. Because one incredibly rare piece from the year 1966 can make the difference between a common copper cent worth only a few pennies and one of the rarest finds in all of Canadian numismatics. The mid-60s were a pivotal era for Canadian coins. At the time, the Canadian Mint was moving away from the traditional compositions for the higher denominations, replacing silver with nickel for dimes, quarters, half dollars, and the silver dollar. During this shift, Canadian Mint engineers experimented with new compositions for the Canadian penny, exploring alternatives to the long-standing copper-bronze mix. That is where the 1966 pattern cent or pattern penny comes in. These coins are sometimes referred to as trial or test pieces, and this 1966 nickel penny is referred to as Charlton number DC-32. This coin was struck in nickel, which is a silvery gray metal, unlike the reddish-brown copper alloy used for regular pennies. Its existence captures a pivotal moment when the Canadian Mint was searching for its next generation of coinage. Although this trial piece never progressed to actual circulation, its significance has only grown over time. Finding information on one-of-a-kind rare coins like the 1966 trial or pattern test nickel penny can prove extremely difficult. Today, it's one of the least known test or trial pieces in Canadian numismatics, and only a handful of examples have been found and accounted for, if that. Here's some of the key things that you can look for that might help you spot this rare 1966 pattern penny versus the common copper bronze counterpart. First, the composition and color of the coins is completely different. The regular 1966 Canadian penny is struck in the common 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc, which is referred to as bronze. And the pattern 1966 penny is struck in pure nickel. So the easiest way to be able to tell if you have one of these rare pattern cents is to check the composition and the color. If it is the regular 1966 penny, it will be red or brown, and if you have the extremely rare pattern cent, it will appear silver. Another clear difference between the regular 1966 cent and the 1966 pattern nickel penny is the weight. The regular penny will have a weight of 3.24 grams, and the nickel pattern will actually come in slightly heavier at 3.5 grams. Regular 1966 copper pennies will not stick to a magnet, but if you find the 1966 pattern nickel 1-cent coin, it will actually be magnetic, so it will stick to a magnet. So if you are able to find a silver 1966 penny, the second test that you can do is try and see if it will stick to the magnet. So what is it that actually makes this coin so rare and desirable? The 1966 nickel pattern penny emerged from a period when the Canadian Mint was exploring new compositions for its lowest denomination. As higher denomination coins switched to nickel, this pattern penny was an experimental attempt to create a durable and cost effective Canadian 1 cent coin. However, for reasons lost to history, possibly cost related, engineering constraints, or public reception, this design and composition never progressed beyond the experimental phase. Today, examples of pattern test or trial coins are exceedingly rare. Based off of similar test, trial, or pattern coins, I would say that there are probably fewer than 5 examples of this piece in existence, if that. This coin's level of rarity, combined with its status as a relic of a pivotal era in Canadian coinage, makes the 1966 pattern penny one of the holy grails for any collector. So, if you're like me and you have a big old stash of Canadian pennies from the 1960s, don't dismiss that odd silvery looking coin just yet. Even the most subtle differences, like the coin's magnetic properties, its color, and weight, might signal that you've uncovered one of the rarest and most significant pieces in modern Canadian numismatics. For the right collector, a 1966 nickel pattern penny could be worth thousands of dollars, and its allure goes far beyond its value. It's a piece of the Canadian Mint's experimental past, a relic of a time when every tiny design and material shift could have reshaped the future of Canadian currency. Now, some of the details and specifications of any of these are off and may indicate that it is not a legitimate or authentic example. Online auction sites like Temu and AliExpress are littered with Canadian counterfeit coins, and unfortunately, it's one of a kind pieces like this pattern penny that fall victim to counterfeiting. So it's always important, if you think you have found something unique or special, to do your due diligence to make sure all of the details line up before you take it in to be appraised or send it in to be graded. So the 1966 nickel pattern 1 cent coin is classified as Charlton code DC-32. It has an alloy and composition of nickel, which will give it its silver appearance. It is magnetic, which means it will stick to a magnet, unlike the common copper penny from 1966. It should have a weight of 3.5 grams, which is 0.26 grams more heavy than the common 1966 penny. It will have a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. Now, what do you say we get into the current market values for this extremely rare penny? So, if you're able to identify all of those factors and the specifications all line up, if you send this coin in to be graded, it is going to be classified as a specimen coin, as most test, trial, and pattern pieces are. But although they are classed as specimen coins, they actually did not come out of specimen sets. They are patterns, tests, or trials that were struck as an experiment at the Mint and were not meant to be released into circulation. So if you're able to find and identify one of these, if it scores around the SP63 mark, which is specimen 63, it can be worth around $1,500. If it scores around SP64, it can be worth around $2,000. And if it scores around SP65, you are looking at around a $2,500 coin, and that is currently the highest appraised price value for this piece. If you did find one and it scored any higher, you could see some little price jumps. We could easily be talking a $3,500, $5,000 coin if it scored in the high SP mark. Now, I do want to point out that your chances of finding coins like this in your pocket change or looking through your coin jars are pretty much slim to nil, but never say never. Some of the rarest coins of all time were discovered through pocket change and coin roll hunting. Even though extremely rare coins like patterns, tests, or trials were not meant to be released into circulation, it doesn't mean that a few of them didn't accidentally escape the Mint facility, either snuck out by Mint employees, or maybe they made their way into the big batches of pennies that were being struck. Regardless, they have been found and accounted for in the past, and the only way that you will ever be able to find one and make the big bucks is to know what to look for. The Canadian $2 coin, also commonly referred to as the toonie, has been a key part of Canada's currency and economy since its introduction on February 19th, 1996. This bimetallic coin was launched by the Minister of Public Works, Diane Marleau, replacing the Canadian $2 banknote. Unlike its paper predecessor, the toonie boasted a significantly longer lifespan, estimated at 20 years, thanks to its patented bimetallic locking mechanism. The toonie is engineered and composed of an aluminum bronze core encased in a pure nickel and later multiply plated steel outer ring. The reverse side of the coin typically features a striking image of a polar bear, which was designed by artist Brent Townsend, while the obverse of the Canadian toonie, which was updated in 2023 after the passing of Queen Elizabeth II, now bears the portrait of King Charles III, with the inscription Charles III DG Rex. This innovative coin was engineered and produced at the Royal Canadian Mint's Winnipeg facility in Manitoba, Canada. By the end of the year 1996, approximately 375 million toonies had been minted, with some of the initial planchettes being sourced from a German company by the name of Deutsche Nickel to help with the overwhelming demand. Unlike the loonie or Canadian $1 coin, which coexisted with the Canadian $1 bill for some time, the $2 bill was withdrawn from circulation just 3 days before the toonie's debut, marking a swift transition and drastic change in the way that Canadians would do cash transactions. The name toonie itself is a clever blend of the words two and loonie. Though other names were proposed, the toonie became the widely used and generally accepted term. The Canadian Mint officially secured the rights to the name in the year 2006. To celebrate its impact, the town of Campbellford, Ontario, which is home to the coin's designer, erected a massive 8-meter tall toonie monument, one of the many giant coins that can be found scattered around the province of Ontario. In the year 2002, Canada celebrated the Golden Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II, marking 50 years since her ascension to the throne on February 6, 1952. This milestone was commemorated with special coinage, including unique designs featuring the Queen's portrait with the dual dates of 1952 to 2002 beneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse of all of the different Canadian coin denominations. However, among these commemorative toonies, a rare and valuable heir emerged that is known as the 2002 dot and H toonie. This heir is distinguished by a small raised dot located in between the two downward strokes and the letter H on the wording for Elizabeth on the obverse of the coin. Unlike the standard 2002 Jubilee toonie, which lacks this marking, this dot is an unintentional feature, likely caused by a die defect. Such defects usually occur when a foreign particle or debris gets struck into the die during the minting process, causing repeated impressions of the anomaly on subsequent coins. It's also possible that prolonged wear on the die could have led to the formation of the raised dot over time. Regardless of how this error came into existence, I can assure you that the dot, however prominent, is not intentional. There are examples of coins with dots put there to intentionally distinguish them from other coins minted with the same date and design, whether they be trials, patterns, tests, specimens, or special issues, but in a lot of cases, like this one, the dot is caused by an anomaly or error in the minting process, as opposed to being put there on purpose. Now here is how you can identify if you have the 2002 dot and H toonie. First, you want to flip over to the obverse side of the coin. You also want to make sure that it is the 2002 Golden Jubilee toonie. So on the obverse underneath Queen Elizabeth's bust, it will have the dual date of 1952 to 2002 beneath her portrait. Then you want to look at the word Elizabeth on the obverse of the coin. Take a look at the letter H in the wording for Elizabeth at the top of the coin. Then look between the two downward strokes beneath the center line in the H for a small raised dot. You can zoom in with your phone's camera or use a digital microscope to get a closer look, and also proper lighting will help make the dot more visible. You can also compare it with a regular issue 2002 toonie. If you have another 2002 Golden Jubilee toonie without the dot, place them side by side and the difference should become much more clear, and you will be able to tell if one of them is definitely the dot or not. The rarity of this error makes it highly desirable among collectors. Even in extremely fine or EF40 condition, which indicates some wear and circulation marks on the coin, the 2002 dot toonie has an appraised value of $237. This means that coins in better condition, especially those in mint state, could fetch significantly higher prices. If uncirculated high-grade examples were to surface, it could easily command impressive premiums in the numismatic market. Coin airs like the 2002 Dot Toonie add an extra layer of intrigue to the hobby. They provide insight into the minting process and highlight how even minor imperfections can turn an ordinary coin into a valuable rarity. As one of the more elusive and valuable Toonie heirs, the 2002 Dot and H Toonie remains a fascinating piece of modern Canadian numismatic history. Now, before we get into the high-end values, so you can find out approximately how much you could get for this coin if you find one, let's go over some of the details and specifications. If any of these are off, it may indicate that the coin is not legitimate, which may seem like overkill, but you would be shocked at the amount of counterfeit toonies that have floated around in the last 5 years or so. And unfortunately, the 2002 is one of the dates that has been counterfeited. If you would like a comprehensive guide on how to identify Canadian counterfeit toonies, I definitely suggest you go check out my video where I show some examples. Now, the overall mintage for the 2002 Golden Jubilee toonie is 27,008,000. The 2002 Dot and H is included in that mintage figure. The coin is composed of an outer ring of 100% nickel and a core composed of 92% copper, 6% aluminum, and 2% nickel. It has a weight of 7.3 grams, a diameter of 28 millimeters, and a thickness of 1.8 millimeters. The obverse was designed and engraved by Dora DePadre Hunt and the reverse by Brent Townsend and Ago Aran. The edge of the coin is serrated and it has a diaxis and metal alignment, which is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, I'm actually going to give you guys the secret trick that I use for determining the approximate or potential value of a coin that doesn't have a lot of price listings. Currently on Coins in Canada, the only listed value for this heir that I could find is $237 for an EF40 example, which is a slightly worn or beat up coin. So first I will give you my high grade example estimates, and then I will show you the basic but effective system that I use to get these values. So the confirmed value that we have currently is $237 for an EF40. So I would estimate that it would be worth around $400 plus for an AU50, probably around $750 to $1,000 for an MS60. You could be seeing prices as high as $2,000 for an MS63, and you could easily be talking a $3,000 coin or more if you did find one of these and is scored in the MS65 range. If you are able to find an uncirculated roll of Canadian 2002 toonies, whether it be from the bank or maybe you buy an uncirculated roll from a coin shop, if you bust it open and find a few of these Dot and H toonies, you can make some big money if they score in the high MS range. Usually coins are struck and rolled sequentially, so if you did open up a roll, chances are you would probably find a few of these heirs if they are in there. Now you may be wondering, how do I come up with these estimates? If they only give a confirmed value of $237 for an EF40, where do I come up with the price of $3,000 for an MS65? Well, it is pretty simple. It is based off of the regular issue 2002 toonies price growth. If you look at the regular 2002 toonie on Coins in Canada, it is appraised at $29.70 for a VF20. And then for an EF40, it is appraised at $72.20. So that is a price increase of 2.43 times in value. So if you round up and you apply a similar 2.5 to 3 times multiplier to the 2002 Dot Toonie's EF40 value of $237, we can estimate an AU50 value of around $400 and an MS60 value of around $750 to $1,000. Now these are just my estimates, of course. They are not just exact values. The only confirmed value that we do have is $237, but if you do use this system, you will find that it's pretty effective most of the time. Now, all of that being said, the 2002 Dot and H toonie is an incredibly rare and valuable heir coin, with even slightly worn EF40 examples fetching around $237. However, if you were to find one in mint state condition, its value could skyrocket into the thousands. Given the rarity of this heir, a high-grade MS65 or better could easily command $3,000 or more, possibly much higher if demand continues to grow. Air coins like this are always sought after by collectors, and history has shown the rare Canadian toonie varieties can fetch impressive sums. If a mint state example of this coin does surface, there's no telling how high the bidding could go. It could easily potentially reach the $5,000 to $10,000 mark or even higher if it's in top condition. So if you ever come across a 2002 Golden Jubilee toonie, be sure to check the H in Elizabeth for that tiny but crucial dot. A quick zoom in with your phone or a digital microscope could be the difference between pocket change and a life-changing find. Recently, collectors have been buzzing about a fascinating new discovery in Canadian coin collecting: the 1989 Canadian dime with a 180-degree rotated die. This error, also known as a coin alignment error, occurs when the reverse side of a coin is misaligned with the obverse side by 180 degrees, causing the design of the blue nose schooner on the reverse to appear upside down in relativity to the portrait of Queen Elizabeth on the obverse. This error happens when one of the dies used to strike the coins becomes improperly aligned during the minting process. Canadian coins are usually struck with two dies, one for the obverse, which will feature the portrait of the current monarch, at the time it was Queen Elizabeth II, and another one for the reverse, which for Canadian dimes showcases the portrait of the Blue Nose schooner. These dies are supposed to be perfectly aligned, so when you flip the coin top to bottom, both sides should remain upright. In the case of the 1989 coin alignment dime, the reverse die was rotated 180 degrees, resulting in the error being created. Such minting mistakes can occur due to improper setup of the dies or failure to correct an existing misalignment. Though errors like this are rare because of the mint's strict quality control measures, the 180-degree rotation is particularly dramatic and noteworthy, which makes it highly desirable for collectors. Errors like this can happen for a number of reasons. The most common cause is improper setup of the dies during the minting process. In some rare cases, the dies may shift during production, and if this shift goes unnoticed, it can result in a batch of coins with rotated designs. The Canadian Mint usually employs strict quality control measures to prevent errors like these from occurring and escaping the mint facility, but no system is perfect. As a result, a few air coins like the 1989 dime with a rotated die still manage to make their way into circulation. Identifying the 1989 Canadian dime rotated die error is relatively straightforward once you know what to look for. One of the easiest ways to check for this error is by using a simple tool like a cardboard coin flip. Start by placing the dime into the flip, making sure that the obverse side, which will have the portrait of the Queen, is facing upright. Once the coin is secured in the flip, hold it steady and flip the entire coin flip over without changing the orientation of the coin itself. If the reverse side, featuring the design of the Blue Nose schooner, appears upside down, you've likely found the 180-degree rotated error. This method is particularly useful because it helps eliminate any accidental rotation or handling error during your inspection. By keeping the coin in the same orientation while flipping the entire coin flip, you can be sure that any misalignment you see is due to a rotated die and not due to how you're actually holding or perceiving the coin. While the 180-degree rotation is the most dramatic and desirable error, it's worth noting that smaller rotations, such as 45 or 90 degrees, can also occur. These less extreme rotations are still considered errors, but they tend to be less valuable than the full 180-degree coin alignment error rotation. However, for serious collectors, any degree of rotation can be a noteworthy addition to your collection. And if you do find any Canadian coin with a rotated die, even if it's only by 10 or 15 degrees, I still suggest that you hold on to it, because for the investment, honestly, to find a nickel or a dime, it's only 10 cents, and if you are able to sell it to someone who's interested in coin collecting eventually, you may be able to make a decent profit off of it. So why exactly is the 1989 Canadian dime rotated die error generating so much excitement right now? One reason is the sheer rarity of this error. While the exact number of 1989 dimes with this rotated die is still unknown, errors of this magnitude typically occur in very limited quantities. Unlike common varieties or minor errors, a 180-degree rotated die is considered a significant minting mistake, and finding one in circulation would be a rare and thrilling experience for any coin roll hunter or collector. Now, what makes this discovery even more exciting is that Canadian dimes in general don't offer a lot of varieties for collectors to hunt for. Aside from the legendary 1969 large date dime, which I have covered in some previous videos, which is considered one of the most rare Canadian coins ever minted, there aren't too many high value dimes floating around in circulation. The scarcity of rare varieties means that the 1989 rotated die air adds a new level of flavor and excitement to the hobby, giving collectors another valuable piece to look for in their searches. With more of these airs popping up and making their way through the woodwork, collectors and dealers alike are starting to recognize the potential value for coins like this. This coin's rarity, combined with the dramatic nature of the 180-degree rotation, make it a standout piece in any air coin collection. High-grade examples of air coins like this can command significant premiums, especially if the air is as visible and striking as a full rotated die. If you do believe that you found a 1989 Canadian dime with a rotated die air, the first step is to confirm its legitimacy. While identifying the rotation is straightforward, ensuring the coin is a legitimate air and not damaged or altered is crucial. Grading companies like PCGS, NGC, or ICCS here in Canada can authenticate and certify your coin, providing a professional assessment of both its air and the overall condition. So next time you are checking your pocket change or searching through some rolls of dimes, take a moment to check for that upside down blue nose, because you never know, you might just stumble upon one of the rarest modern Canadian dimes in circulation today. Now, before we get into the values for this coin, some of the details and specifications, if any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not an authentic example. The overall mintage figure for the Canadian 1989 10-cent coin is 198,693,414. It is composed of 99.9 nickel. It is magnetic. It has a weight of 2.07 grams, a diameter of 18.03 millimeters, and a thickness of 1.16 millimeters. The edge of the coin is reeded. The usual die axis should be in metal alignment, but if you want to find the air, then it will be in coin alignment. The obverse was designed by Arnold Mockin and the reverse by Emmanuel Hahn. The mintage figure for the 1989 rotated die air is included for the overall 1989 10-cent mintage, so somewhere around 198 million dimes were made in 1989. That is a pretty high mintage figure, especially for Canadian coins, which is actually a good sign because it means that a decent number of these airs could have escaped into circulation. Now, as we get into the values for this coin, I was unfortunately not able to find any high-grade example prices, but I was able to find some low-grade prices for you guys. Just to give you guys a base price and idea, the regular 1989 can be worth around 15 cents for an AU, so that is the first price increase from its face value. It's only worth 10 cents until you get to an AU 50. But just to give you guys an idea, if you can find a 1989 dime in the coin alignment, so that is with a 180-degree rotation, it can be worth almost $400 for an AU 50. So that is not even in the mint state range, and considering the regular issue of the 1989 is only worth 15 cents in the same grade, if you were to find one of these and it did score, especially in the high mint state range, I don't doubt that you could easily get a couple $1,000s, maybe even 10,000 if it scores from an MS65 or higher. Most Canadian coin collectors are familiar with the iconic 12-sided nickels that began appearing in the year 1942, but very few know the story of an incredibly rare prototype that came before them, a coin that was never meant to be seen by public eyes and that almost no one has actually held in person. This coin is known as the 1942 Pattern 5-cent coin, or by its Charlton catalog designation DC-25. This elusive test piece was created by the Canadian Mint as part of an experimental effort to revolutionize Canadian coinage during one of the most tumultuous periods in modern history, World War II. One of the key reasons for the Canadian Mint switching to a 12-sided shape for nickels in 1942 was to prevent confusion between coin denominations. During World War II, nickel as a metal was urgently needed for the war effort, so the mint replaced it with tombac, a copper-zinc alloy that had a golden bronze color, almost identical to Canadian pennies at the time. To avoid the public, bank tellers, or merchants mistaking tombac nickels for 1-cent coins, the mint introduced the distinctive 12-sided or dodecagonal shape. This new design helped Canadians quickly distinguish nickels from pennies by feel and appearance. Even after tombac was phased out in 1944 and replaced with chrome-plated steel, the 12-sided shape remained until the year 1963 when Canadian nickels finally returned to their round form. At first glance, the 1942 pattern nickel could resemble the familiar tombac nickel that entered circulation the same year, but in reality it is a completely different coin. This piece was struck in pure nickel rather than the copper-zinc alloy known as tombac, and it was never intended for public distribution or to be released in collector sets. The 1942 pattern nickel DC-25 was produced in vanishingly small numbers solely to evaluate the feasibility of a 12-sided coin shape. This dodecagonal form would go on to define the look of Canadian nickels for the next 21 years, making the pattern coin somewhat of an origin piece in Canadian numismatics. To fully understand why this pattern nickel was created, we need to go back to the year 1942. At this time, Canada was fully engaged in World War II, and nickel as a metal was deemed as a strategic war resource. It was needed in large quantities for use in armor plating, aircraft engines, and other military-grade materials. The Canadian government, in partnership with the Canadian Mint, began phasing out nickel from coinage in favor of more abundant and less strategically valuable metals. The first nickels issued for general circulation in 1942 were round versions that were struck in nickel, and these were issued early in the year before the changeover to tombac. And then eventually, the 12-sided tombac nickels began to make their way into circulation later in 1942 as well. But before the mint could move forward with mass producing this new 12-sided tombac coin, it had to conduct internal tests to ensure that the new shape could be struck reliably, used effectively in vending machines, and was generally accepted by the Canadian public. The mint needed a prototype, a test piece with the proposed new shape, but from the original nickel material to evaluate how the new design would perform under real-world conditions. And that is how these 1942 pattern nickels came into existence. The pattern nickel DC-25 is notable for several reasons that elevate it far beyond an ordinary collector piece. First and foremost, it is one of Canada's earliest and rarest pattern coins. These types of coins are generally produced in extremely limited numbers and are used only internally at mints to test the designs, alloys, and shapes before they go into full production. Unlike the tombac 12-sided nickels that did reach circulation, this coin retained the original nickel composition, resulting in a silvery appearance as opposed to the golden bronze hue of the tombac coins. These pattern pieces were not meant to be saved or collected. They were intended for internal evaluation only, and the vast majority were likely destroyed once the testing was concluded. However, a few examples, possibly fewer than a dozen, somehow escaped destruction. Whether through employee souvenir keeping, mishandling, or intentional preservation, these coins found their way into private collections or institutional archives, where they have since become mythical treasures in Canadian numismatics. If you ever come across a strange-looking 1942 Canadian nickel, here's how you might miraculously recognize one of these pattern coins. First, you want to take a look at the shape. The coin must be dodecagonal, so it will have 12 distinct flat edges. This dodecagonal shape was introduced in 1942, but was only used in circulation for the tombac nickel. You then want to take a look at the metal composition and color of the coin. Unlike the golden tone of the tombac nickels, the pattern version is struck in nickel, which will give it a silver hue similar to the round nickels in 1942. You then want to check the weight and size. This coin will weigh 5.5 grams and will measure 23.62 millimeters in diameter. Due to its ultra-limited production and high historical significance, the 1942 pattern nickel commands exceptionally high valuables at auction. Even lower grade examples are extremely coveted, but those in specimen 62 condition or better can bring in over $10,000. Some in high grade conditions, like SP65, have fetched prices approaching or even exceeding $20,000 Canadian. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that virtually none of these coins are accessible to the average collector. Most known examples are tucked away in museum collections or held tightly by elite collectors or investors. It's estimated that somewhere between 10 to 12 examples exist in private hands, making this one of the rarest and most desirable 5-cent coins ever produced in Canada. Even though most collectors, coin roll hunters, or numismatists will never encounter this coin in person, the 1942 pattern nickel represents a critical turning point in Canadian minting history. It not only marks the transition to the iconic 12-sided nickel, a design that would define the denomination for over 2 decades, but it also showcases the kind of wartime adaptability that shaped Canadian industry and innovation during the 1940s. Coins like the 1942 test piece DC-25 remind us that numismatics aren't just about collecting money, it's about collecting stories, moments in history, and forgotten artifacts. So if you are ever lucky enough to encounter a strange looking 1942 nickel, perhaps in a dusty old coin box, a misidentified estate lot, or coin roll hunting, take a look closely, because you might just be staring at a 6-figure piece of Canadian coinage history. Believe it or not, there's one subtle detail on Canadian pennies from the years 1953 to 1955 that can make the difference between pocket change and the find of a lifetime. Before we discuss the 1955 pennies, first I need to explain one of the most important design quirks that can be found in Canadian numismatics, and that is the shoulder fold versus the no shoulder fold varieties. These tiny differences, although small and subtle, could mean the difference between big bucks, so let's break it all down. It all started on February 6, 1952, when Queen Elizabeth II first ascended the throne after the death of her father, King George VI. That year, Canadian coins still featured King George VI's effigy, but the Canadian Mint needed a brand new portrait for 1953, and they had to get it just right. 17 plaster models of the new Queen's effigy were submitted from around the world, and after some deliberation, the Royal Mint in London chose the now iconic uncrowned portrait by sculptor Mary Gillick. But here's where things get interesting. For the first time ever, Canada was allowed to create its own obverse master tools directly from the artist's model, rather than using the dies from London. This was considered a historic move by the Canadian Mint, but it led to technical difficulties in producing the obverse portrait designs for Canadian coins. When production began, something became clear very quickly, and that is the relief of the Queen's portrait was too high. This meant that the finer details weren't striking properly, especially the fold in the gown on Queen Elizabeth II's shoulder. That is where Thomas Shingles, who was the Royal Canadian Mint's chief engraver at the time, stepped in. He retouched the design, adjusting the Queen's gown to better emphasize the fold, also known as the strap. This led to the creation of 2 distinct varieties of coins. Now, the easiest way to identify the difference between the shoulder fold and the no shoulder fold on your Canadian coins isn't actually to look at the shoulder itself, it is to look at a single letter on the obverse of the coin. What you want to do is flip over to the obverse and look at the letter I in the word DEI, which is part of the Latin inscription DEI Gratia. If the ends of the letter I are flared out and come to points, then it is the no shoulder fold variety. If the letter I is straight and blunt with no flaring contrast, then you have the regular shoulder fold coin. There are a few different methods for identifying the difference between the shoulder fold and no shoulder fold, but even on worn coins, this trick works like magic, and it is the go-to method for experienced collectors. The shoulder fold and no shoulder fold cent varieties even continued into the years 1954 and 1955, making those years just as collectible if you know what to look for. So why do collectors and numismatists care so much about this incredibly subtle difference? Well, it's an incredibly important part of Canadian numismatic history. One reason is because it was the first new monarch featured on coin designs in over a decade. This also marked a pivotal period when Canada became even more independent and less reliant on Britain for its coin production, which actually led to the mishap which created this variety. Now, depending on the denomination, year, condition, and whether it is the no shoulder fold or shoulder fold, the value of your coin can vary significantly. In some cases, the rarer no shoulder fold varieties fetch extreme premiums, especially in high grades. Even if your coin isn't worth a fortune, sometimes it's just fun being able to identify a hidden variety with nothing more than your eyes or zooming in with your phone, and being able to identify this variety with no more than your eyes and a little bit of numismatic know-how. The 1953 shoulder fold versus no shoulder fold debate might seem like a small detail, but in the world of Canadian coin collecting, small differences can mean everything. So the next time you're going through your change or your grandparents' coin jar, pay close attention to the I in the DEI on 1953 to 1955 Canadian coins, because it just might be the tiny clue that reveals a hidden gem. The 1955 no shoulder fold Canadian penny is one of the most desirable varieties in modern Canadian numismatics. While both the shoulder fold and the no shoulder fold varieties were struck in the year 1955 for the Canadian 1-cent coin, it is the no shoulder fold version that stands out for its rarity and collector appeal. This coin has become especially sought after due to its limited mintage and the visual subtlety that separates it from its more common counterpart. Now, the key difference between the two different varieties lies on the obverse in the coin, specifically in the inscription DEI Gratia. Now, as I mentioned previously, to identify which version of these coins you have, you want to look at the last letter of I in the word DEI. On the rarer no shoulder fold variety, the I will have flared or pointed ends, giving it a delicate serif-like appearance. On the shoulder fold version, which was introduced later that year to strengthen the design and reduce the die wear, the eye is blunt and squared, often described as straight or flat at the ends. Despite the name, the so-called shoulder fold actually refers to a thicker neckline or shoulder strap on the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. But it is the I in the DEI that gives collectors the clearest, fastest way to tell the two apart. Now, even for the most seasoned of collectors, finding a genuine 1955 no shoulder fold penny would feel like hitting the jackpot. But what if I told you that there is a lesser known variety that could increase the value of these coins, known as the Hanging 5? So far, the Hanging 5 variety has only been discovered on the more common 1955 shoulder fold penny. This variety is named for a small hook-like line that appears just above and to the left of the digit 5 in the date on the reverse side of the coin. This line resembles a thread or crack hanging from the top of the 5, hence the name the Hanging 5 variety. This subtle anomaly is likely the result of a die crack, which is a defect that occurs when a minting die develops a fracture or crack, transferring the unintended raised mark onto each subsequent coin that it strikes. While minor die cracks are relatively common in older coins, the specific position and shape of this one has caught the attention of collectors. Now, I'm not too sure what was going on at the Canadian Mint in the late 50s and the 1960s, but you can find all sorts of hanging digit varieties for lots of the different penny dates, and that includes 1962, 1963, and several more. I'm probably going to be covering some of those in a future video, so if you would like to see those, stay tuned. On its own, a Hanging 5 error on the less rare 1955 shoulder fold penny can give the coin a small value boost. However, if a Hanging 5 were ever confirmed on a no shoulder fold penny, which is a variety that's already prized for its rarity, the combination of these two anomalies could create a truly exceptional piece, possibly even a holy grail for Canadian small scent collectors. It would represent a crossover of both rarity and minting flaws that is incredibly hard to come by, and no such example has officially been documented yet. Whether you're new to coin collecting or a seasoned veteran, learning to identify these varieties is a skill worth having and mastering. Always check your 1955 pennies under good lighting or zoom in with your phone. You want to look at the last I in the word DEI on the obverse of the coin to determine if you have the shoulder fold or no shoulder fold variety. With so many pennies still floating around in collection jars, flea markets, and coin shops, the next great discovery could be sitting in someone's change jar just waiting to be discovered right now. Now, if you do think you have found a legitimate 1955 no shoulder fold penny, especially one with a possible hanging 5, it is definitely a smart move to have it authenticated by a reputable third-party grading service like ICCS, PCGS, or NGC. And if you really believe that you may have found this coin and you are pretty sure that it is the variety that I am discussing, you could even take it into your local coin shop to get a second opinion. Confirming the coin's authenticity and also its condition is the first and most important step to realizing its full value. Now, before we do get into the values for the 1955 pennies, some of the details and specifications. If any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not an authentic example. The overall mintage for the Canadian 1955 penny is 56,403,193. That includes both the shoulder fold and no shoulder fold varieties. It is composed of 98% copper, 0.5% tin, and 1.5% zinc. It has a weight of 3.24 grams, a diameter of 19.05 millimeters. It has a current copper melt value of 3 cents Canadian per penny. The obverse was designed and engraved by Mary Gillick and the reverse by G.E. Kruger Gray, and the die axis is in metal alignment, which is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, what do you say we get into the values for the different Canadian 1955 penny varieties? First, we will start with the most common, which is the 1955 shoulder fold. So to identify this, you want to look at the last I in DEI on the obverse of the coin, and if it looks straight and blunt, then it is the shoulder fold, which is the most common. It can be worth around 4 to 30 cents for a circulated example. It can be worth around $11 for an MS64, and it can be worth all the way up to $1,250 for an MS67, and that might seem like a pretty good value, but to be honest, you're probably not going to be finding many 1955 pennies that are in that good of shape anymore. The next variety that we are going to discuss is the 1955 shoulder fold, and that is the hanging 5 variety. So once again, to identify the hanging 5 heir, what you want to do is look at the last digit of 5 and the date of 1955 on the reverse of the coin, and you want to look for a small hook-like line that is running from the top of the 5 and to the left. Now, if you can identify this on the more common shoulder fold variety, it can be worth around $18 for an MS64, so slightly more valuable than the more common shoulder fold without the hanging 5. And then last but not least, we have the 1955 no shoulder fold, which is the rarest and most valuable of the 1955 penny varieties that are currently known to exist. Now, if you are able to find the no shoulder fold variety on a 1955 penny, it can be worth around $150 to $600 for an even well-worn and circulated example. So even if this thing has been beat up and been put through the meat grinder, you're still going to be able to get around $100 for this coin. Even if you aren't able to get it graded, if you were able to find one of these and you posted it on an auction site, even like eBay, I don't doubt that you could easily get $100, as people probably want this to fill out their books and collections. If you are able to find one of these and it scores around the MS64 mark, it can be worth anywhere from $6,000 to $7,000. $7,000. Now, just to give you guys a comparison, the regular shoulder fold variety is only worth around $18 in that same grade. So that is a massive, massive price increase. Now, I wasn't able to find any quotes or estimates for any higher grades than an MS64, but I don't doubt if it did score any higher, then you could get easily around $10,000 for the 1955 no shoulder fold Canadian penny. Now, as I mentioned previously, there currently aren't any of these known to exist with the hanging 5 variety, but if you were able to identify a hanging 5 on a no shoulder fold penny, it could make its value skyrocket. We could be talking a $50,000 coin, because having both of those attributes would make it a one-of-a-kind piece. The Canadian quarter, officially known as the 25-cent coin, is a key component of Canada's coinage system. Worth 25 cents face value, or 1/4 of a Canadian dollar, this small circular coin has a distinctive silver appearance thanks to its multiply plated steel composition. It features a reeded edge and is often compared to its American counterpart, which shares the same value and general size. The quarter has been an integral part of Canadian currency for well over a century. Since their initial introduction, every Canadian coin has featured the effigy of the reigning British monarch on the obverse. However, the reverse designs have seen significant changes over the years. While the traditional and most iconic design showcases a caribou, which is an emblem of Canada's northern wilderness, the Royal Canadian Mint facility introduces commemorative editions that celebrate the nation's history, culture, and achievements quite regularly. In Canada, 25-cent coins are currently manufactured at the Royal Canadian Mint's state-of-the-art facility in Winnipeg, Manitoba. Canadian quarters are struck in massive quantities, with up to 2 billion circulation coins being produced each year. Since the year 2000, the Mint has employed its patented multiply plated steel technology, which enhances durability and cost efficiency for Canadian coinage. This innovation was initially applied to 5, 10, 25, and 50-cent coins, but in the year 2012, it was extended to the loonie and toonie. One of the most notable series of Canadian quarters came to the lead-up of the new millennium. In 1999, the Royal Canadian Mint announced a national contest inviting Canadians to design a special set of 24 quarters, one for each month of both the years 1999 and 2000. The designs in 1999 focused on reflecting Canada's past, while the designs for the year 2000 symbolized the country's future. Each coin in 1999 was inscribed with its month of issue, while the 2000 quarters featured thematic labels such as pride and ingenuity. The response for this new quarter series was overwhelming, with thousands of Canadians submitting designs that captured the nation's spirit. Despite being produced in vast numbers, making most of these Millennium Quarters only worth their face value, there are a few rare varieties that exist, and they are highly sought after by collectors. There are a few different quarters from the year 2000 which feature unique variations on their obverse designs, making them exceptionally valuable in the global numismatic community. Collectors and enthusiasts continue to search for these elusive variations, hoping to uncover a hidden treasure, whether they are coin roll hunting or just casually searching through their pocket change. To this day, the Canadian quarter remains one of the most iconic and versatile coins in circulation. Whether it's the traditional caribou design or one of the many commemorative issues that celebrates Canada's rich and vibrant history, these coins serve as both everyday currency and cherished collectibles for generations to come. Now, what do you say we discuss the coins that you are all here to find out about? In the late 1990s, the Canadian Mint began transitioning from nickel-based coinage to a more cost-effective multiply plated steel technology. This new and revolutionary process involved electromagnetically applying a thin layer of nickel, then a layer of copper, and then a final layer of nickel to a steel core. This change reduced production costs, improved durability, and allowed for the creation of unique electromagnetic signatures that enhance the security of the coins and also allow for vending machine compatibility. To test the effectiveness of these new plated coins, the Canadian Mint produced a limited number of these pieces with a small P mint mark beneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. These test pieces were primarily distributed to vending machine companies to ensure that the new coinage functioned correctly with existing mechanisms. In most cases, vending machines accepted the new plating quarters without any issues, and any that didn't were allowed to be calibrated in the time leading up to the release. It should also be noted that in 1999, the Canadian Mint released a special mint set containing each of the denominations of the new plated coins, including a special test token, and they are all marked with the P mint or composition mark on the obverse. Now, although these are pretty limited, they only made around 20,000 sets, they aren't super valuable. If you do find one of them in your pocket change, you can definitely get more than face value, but usually they're only going to be worth about $10 or $20 for a single piece, and that's if it's in really good condition. In 2000, the first widely circulated plated coins were the 2000p nickels and pennies, which were likely a preliminary trial before officially introducing plated dimes, quarters, and other denominations into circulation in 2001. However, this raises a crucial question. Why did 2000p quarters exist when they were never officially released into circulation? First, there's the 2000p December Community Quarter, for which there are only 5 certified known examples currently. Then there's the 2000p October Creativity Quarter, for which there are only 2 known examples currently. And last but not least, we have the 2000p Caribou Quarter, which will feature the standard design of the caribou on the reverse, and it will have the P mint mark on the obverse directly underneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth. There are only 2 known certified examples of the Caribou 2000p quarter, but I would actually consider this to be the rarest of the 3. The 2000p Caribou Quarter is particularly intriguing because there were 1999p Canadian quarters issued in special sets and for testing, but none were actually released into circulation or were meant to be. The regular 2000 Caribou Quarter, which features the iconic caribou design on the reverse, was officially issued in sets without the P mint mark on the obverse. However, for reasons unknown, whether due to an error or an experiment or perhaps a mint employee mistake, some of these 2000p Caribou Quarters have surfaced. Their existence remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in modern Canadian numismatics. If you ever come across a 2000 Millennium Community or Creativity Quarter, or even one of the 2000 Caribou Quarters while you are coin roll hunting or checking your pocket change, inspect it carefully for the small P mint or composition mark beneath Queen Elizabeth's bust on the obverse, because if you do find one, you may have discovered one of the rarest modern Canadian coins in existence. Due to their extreme scarcity, these coins command exceptionally high prices in the numismatic market and at auctions. While the exact values depend on the coin's condition and certification, these rare 2000p quarters have been known to sell for thousands or tens of thousands of dollars at auction. Their elusive nature means that their value could continue to rise as more collectors become aware of their significance. And I think that it is super important that as many people know about these rare coins that exist as possible. There is a program in Canada called the ARP where they actually melt down and destroy a lot of our old coins for the precious metal content. So a lot of the rare old Holy Grail coins could be being lost to the ARP, and if we could even find one more of these, it would be a Holy Grail find for Canadian numismatics. So always keep your eyes open because you never know what you can find in your pocket change. The Canadian Quarter remains one of the most iconic and widely collected coins in circulation. Whether it's the classic caribou design, a commemorative issue which celebrates Canada's history, or an ultra rare variety like one of the 2000p Communities, Creativity, or Caribou Quarters, or even the very low mintage 1991 quarter, these coins serve as everyday currency and cherished collectibles for generations to come. Now, what do you say we get into some of the values and auction records for these extremely rare quarters? First, we're going to start off with the 2000p October Creativity Quarter. Now, to identify this, you want to look for the October Creativity design on the reverse of the Millennium Quarter. Then you want to flip over to the obverse and look for a little P mint mark beneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth. Now, I can personally say that I have found hundreds and hundreds of these Millennium Quarters, and I have never found anything like this before. So this is usually a game of numbers. You probably want to save these up and then check them all in a big old pile, and then you can just return them to the bank or spend them and you don't lose out any money. But for the 2000p October Creativity Quarter, it has a current estimated value of around $10,000 for an MS65 example. If you were to find one and it graded any higher, you would see some massive price jumps. You could easily be talking a $40,000, $50,000 coin if it scored in that MS67 mark. So if you ever bust open a roll of October Creativity Quarters and you find one in there with a P, you may have just hit the jackpot. Next up, we have the 2000p December Community Quarter. Now, to identify this one, you want to look for the December Community Design on the Millennium Quarter series, and then you want to flip over to the obverse and look for a little P mint mark beneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth. I do want to point out, the chances are whether you check dozens or even hundreds of these, you will probably never see that P mint mark. But when it comes to coin collecting and coin roll hunting, it is a numbers game. You want to search through as many as possible, whether you're looking for that 1973 large bust or you're looking for one of these. You want to stock up as many of these quarters as you can and then just search them all at the same time, because if these coins have been found, then that means they can be found. Now, in terms of value for the 2000p December Community Quarter, it can be worth around $12,000 for an MS60 and up to $15,000 for an MS65 example. I do want to note that one of these also sold for $10,755 for an AU55 example, and that was actually in November 23rd, 2024, so just last year, and that was for an AU55. So that one was a little bit beat up, so if you were to find one and it's been put through the meat grinder, you can still make some insane money off these. Now, last but not least, we have the 2000p Caribou Quarter. Now, to identify this one, you want to look for the iconic caribou design on the reverse of the quarter, and it will also have the date of 2000. Then you want to flip over to the obverse and you want to look under the bust of Queen Elizabeth II for a little P mint or composition mark. And if you locate that mark, you have yourself one of the rarest modern Canadian quarters in existence. Now, it is very hard to find values for this piece online, but I was able to find an auction record of $26,400 for a PCGS graded MS65, and that sold in the year 2020 in Heritage Auctions. And that was for the 2000p Caribou Quarter. Now, the basic story of the German planchette toonies is in early 1996, the Canadian Mint had not yet fully mastered the bimetallic planchette production. To meet initial production demands, they actually sourced a limited batch of blank planchettes from a company called Deutsche Nickel in Germany. The German planchette toonies feature the same aluminum bronze core, but they have a smoother, more satin-like finish with a richer golden hue compared to the Canadian planchettes. An estimated 10 million German planchette blanks were produced, but only a small number of the completed coins actually entered circulation, making them relatively rare and highly collectible. So if you ever have any 1996 toonies in your pocket change, if you find one with a noticeably different core finish and color, it could possibly be the German planchette variety. The best way to be able to tell some of these coins is to actually do a side-by-side comparison with a Canadian planchette, which will help reveal some of the subtle differences. Chances are, if you deal with pocket change pretty regularly, you can probably find a Canadian planchette 1996 toonie pretty easily. So if you ever do, hold on to it, and then you can use it as a comparison or a reference point when you are checking for the German planchette variety. I do also need to point out that Canada has had a huge problem with counterfeit toonies over the last 5 years or so. I believe a gentleman was arrested and connected to a lot of these counterfeit toonies, but a lot of them are still floating around there in circulation, and unfortunately 1996 is one of the most common years for counterfeits. So you definitely want to make sure that you actually have a legitimate Canadian planchette or the legitimate German planchette. One of the easiest ways you can tell that is to look at the nose on Queen Elizabeth. The tip of the nose will be a lot sharper and will have less detail on the counterfeits. You also want to look at the polar bear's paw on the reverse of the coin. The counterfeits will have what is known as a camel toe. It kind of protrudes and looks abnormal opposed to the regular example. I've actually made a video on Canadian counterfeit toonies. If you're seeking any additional information or you'd like to see some more in-depth videos or pictures, I definitely suggest you check that out. So next up, we have the die chip errors, which are the horned polar bear and the cigar toonie. A die chip occurs when a tiny piece of the metal dies using to strike the coins breaks off or becomes damaged, causing noticeable raised blobs or irregular shapes on the subsequently struck coins. Now, the first of these two die chip errors is referred to as the horned polar bear. This can be identified by looking for a small raised horn that appears just above the polar bear's head on the reverse of the coin. This design element is not intentional, but is a minting mistake as a result of die chips. The second of the two different die chip toonie varieties is referred to as the cigar toonie. This can be identified by looking for a raised cigar-shaped blob that seems to hang from the polar bear's mouth or muzzle. These die chip errors are unique reminders of some of the early production challenges faced by the Canadian Mint when producing some of the first toonies, and they are prized by collectors for both their rarity and their character. Now, the last of these different 1996 toonie errors that I'm going to discuss, and I get questions about these all the time, is off-centered or uncentered core errors. The Canadian Toonie's bimetallic design requires the inner aluminum bronze core to be precisely centered inside the nickel outer ring and then struck into the coin during assembly or striking, but sometimes the core will shift. Here's how you can identify an off-center or uncentered core error on your 1996 Canadian Toonie. First, the core of the toonie may be slightly or severely off-center, with the gold core shifted so much that it touches or even overlaps with the silver-colored outer edge. This might actually be one of the easiest toonie errors to identify. You probably don't need a magnifying glass, but zooming in with your phone or looking at it under a microscope might help you be able to determine if it is off-centered or not. Usually when it comes to errors, the more significant the error, the more rare and valuable the coin will be. And another thing you want to consider with these uncentered or off-centered core toonies is you want to make sure that someone hasn't actually popped the core out and then reinserted it and tried to make it appear like an off-centered toonie. So if it is actually a significant off-centered toonie and it's in pretty good condition, then you might have a coin that is worth a good couple bucks. The 1996 toonie represents a pivotal moment in Canadian numismatics, the birth of the $2 coin and the nation's first circulating bimetallic coin. Its initial production hurdles led to fascinating varieties that offer both historical significance and collector value. Whether you're a casual collector or a serious numismatist, understanding and hunting these varieties can be extremely rewarding. Now, before we get into the values for each of these different toonies, some of the details and specifications, if any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not a legitimate example, and you definitely want to do your due diligence on these 1996 toonies to make sure it is not a counterfeit. The overall mintage for the Canadian Planchette 1996 toonies is somewhere around 315 million. The German planchettes were produced with a mintage of somewhere around 10 million. The cigar and the horn are included in those mintage figures above. Usually when it comes to the heirs, you're going to find them on the Canadian planchettes. If you do happen to find any of these heirs on a German planchette, that will only increase the value even more. 1996 toonies have an outer ring composed of 100% nickel, an inner core composed of 92% copper, 6% aluminum, and 2% nickel. They have a weight of 7.3 grams, a diameter of 28 millimeters, a thickness of 1.8 millimeters. They were designed and engraved by Dora de Pedri-Hun and Augo Aran for the obverse, and Brent Townsend and Augo Aran for the reverse. The edge of the coin is a spleen that is interrupted, so it will have a few notches and then a smooth surface, and then a few more notches around the outside edge of the coin. And it has a die-axis and metal alignment, which is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, what do you say we get into the values for these different 1996 Canadian toonie varieties? First, as I mentioned, the 1996 Canadian Planchette toonie. It has a maximum value of around $100 if you find it in exceptional condition. Usually you won't get more than face value for a common Canadian planchette 1996 toonie. But just to give you a comparison, if you find a 1996 German planchette, it can be worth around $104 for an MS63. MS63 is a relatively high grade, but this is a coin that people want for their collections. I have actually found at least one German planchette Canadian toonie in my coin roll hunting career, and it was in pretty darn good shape when I found it. Even if you find a German planchette toonie that's pretty beat up, you can still usually get around $10 to $20 as long as you are sure that it is the German planchette, which will mean that it will have a more smooth and satin-like appearance, and the gold center core will have a more contrasted hue. If you can identify those and you have a German planchette toonie, it can be worth all the way up to $700 for an MS66 example. If you did find one and it scored any higher, you could easily get $1,000 for one of these German planchettes. They are highly sought after, and even though this coin is just about 30 years old, they made tons of toonies in 1996, and you have a pretty decent chance of being able to find one of these varieties if you keep your eyes open. So next up, we have the 1996 cigar variety. To identify this, you want to look for a small die chip at the end of the polar bear's mouth that'll make it look like he is smoking a cigar. If you can identify that, it can be worth around $10 for an MS63. So these aren't worth too much above face value. You might be able to get $5, $10 if somebody really wants it for their collection or really likes the air. But they can be worth up to about $100 for an MS65. And then last but not least, we have the 1996 horn variety, which is actually a little bit more rare than the cigar variety. To identify the horn variety on the 1996 toonie, you want to look for a small die chip located around the top of the polar bear's head that gives the appearance that he has a horn. If you can identify that, it can be worth around $40 for an MS63, so not too much above face, but you might be able to get around $10 or $20 for a beat up example if the horn air is pretty prominent. Now, the horn variety can be worth around $150 for an MS65. You might even be able to get around $300 if it scores any higher than that. Now, for the uncentered or off-centered core toonies, there aren't actually any prices listed in any coin guides or on the internet, so the value is really whatever you can get somebody to pay for it. Usually, as is the case with most airs, the more significant the air, the more somebody will be willing to pay for it. If the off-centering on your 1996 Canadian toonie is significant, you might actually be able to get some really good money. A lot of people keep their eyes out for these things, and it is one of the more well-known airs. I'm actually surprised that they don't have any price listings, but I don't doubt that you could get anywhere from $10 to $20 for a beat up one if the off-centering is pretty significant. And if you find one and it's in really good condition, I don't doubt that you could easily get a couple $100 if it scores in the MS range. It is a unique coin air that only bimetallic coins will have, and it is also pretty historical considering that was the first year for Canadian toonies as well. In the year 1970, Canada issued a commemorative nickel dollar to mark the 100th anniversary of Manitoba's entry into the Canadian Confederation. It's a beautiful piece featuring an intricate design of a prairie crocus. These coins were struck in relatively large numbers for both the circulation and proof versions, and today they are reasonably common among collectors. But what if I told you that somewhere deep within the Royal Canadian Mint, a handful of these coins were secretly struck in gold? Finding any information on this coin is extremely difficult. I was not able to find any articles online or any information pertaining to how many exist, but from what I can gather, there are 6 known examples currently that exist today that are struck on gold planchettes instead of the nickel planchettes that they were intended to be struck on. However, these coins were not officially produced by the Mint. This wasn't some grand government project or a special VIP issue. Instead, the prevailing theory is that these coins were created illegally by Mint employees, possibly in an attempt to smuggle them out for personal profit. According to numismatic lore, these unauthorized gold strikes were uncovered, leading to a scandal within the Mint. Some sources even suggest that employees were caught, punished, and the remaining unauthorized coins were either seized or destroyed. But despite efforts to erase these coins from history, at least 6 managed to survive, and their existence has continued to haunt the Canadian Mint for years ever since. Now, what is the Royal Canadian Mint's official statement or position regarding these pieces? Do they consider them to be counterfeit or collectible? The Canadian Mint has a long and complicated relationship with error coins, particularly those that were never meant to be produced. Over the years, they have generally taken the stance that such pieces fall into one of two categories. There are error coins that were produced due to quality control issues. True mint errors, where a coin was struck incorrectly due to a mistake during the production process. These coins, although errors, are considered collectible, and the Canadian Mint does not typically interfere with their sale. Then there are counterfeits, which are unauthorized strikes. These are coins that are made improperly or under suspicious circumstances, often without approval. The Canadian Mint considers these coins to be stolen property or fraudulent and has a history of seizing them when they appear on the market. So which of these categories does the 1970 gold Manitoba dollar fit into? Since these coins were not the result of a production mistake, but rather an alleged deliberate act by Mint employees, they do not fall under the mint error category. Therefore, the Canadian Mint classifies them as counterfeits or stolen property, making them legally vulnerable to seizure. And indeed, seizures have happened. This is not just some unfounded theory, there is a long history of unauthorized Canadian coins being confiscated. Here are some notable examples. In the year 1980, a 1970 gold Manitoba dollar was seized in Cincinnati, Ohio, at the request of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. In the year 1981, a 50-cent and $1 mule error was seized at the ANA convention in Milwaukee. Another one of these same pieces was seized before a major Torex auction. In the year 1989, a Diving Goose silver dollar was seized from J&M Coin, though it was later returned to them. And around 15 to 20 Natural Legacy 25-cent coins struck in copper were seized, and a Mint employee in Winnipeg was arrested. There is a legal precedent that these unauthorized coins are the property of the Canadian Mint, meaning that they can be taken at any time if you legally purchase one. Some collectors will say that certain high-value errors are fine as long as they are openly traded in public auctions and the Canadian Mint will not interfere. However, the 1970 gold Manitoba dollar is a much different case because there are actually court orders that state that the Canadian Mint owns that coin. So if you do buy or own one, fishing it around trying to sell it publicly could actually result in its seizure. Despite the risk, these coins often fetch huge prices at auction, and for a coin that technically shouldn't exist, the 1970 gold Manitoba dollar carries an astonishing price tag. Recent auctions have seen them sell for between $10,000 and $15,000 Canadian, and it is likely the private sales go even higher. Some of the most notable sales that have occurred in the last 5 years happened on January 13th, 2020, when an MS-63 example sold at Heritage Auctions for $4,934. And almost exactly 5 years later, January 13th, 2025, that same piece was auctioned off by Heritage Auctions for an insane price of $14,688, which is a slight price reduction from 5 years prior, but considering the controversy behind this piece, it is not super surprising. The fact that PCGS has certified these coins is also incredibly interesting. Since PCGS is one of the most respected grading companies in the numismatic world, this suggests that they recognize these coins as legitimate despite the controversy surrounding them, and the situation brings up even more complexities. If a coin were seized, PCGS might have to address its involvement and liability. The Canadian Mint may have quietly allowed these coins to be legitimized to avoid legal complications. But who knows, there could be even more of these irregularities still hiding from the public eye. All of this makes the 1970 gold Manitoba dollar one of the most fascinating and mysterious Canadian coins ever produced. Now, this event took place during the 1966 to 1971 golden age of mint irregularities, a period where a surprising number of unauthorized or controversial pieces emerged from the Canadian Mint. I do want to mention that many of the most bizarre off-metal or unauthorized Canadian coins all came from this time period. Some of those pieces include, but are not limited to, a 1969 25-cent coin that was struck on a Prussian 20-mark gold planchette. There are actually multiple coins and denominations that were struck in the wrong metals throughout those years. The infamous 1967 Diving Goose silver dollar with a rotated die air was produced during this period. Now, why is it that so many of these strange and unusual coins came into existence during this time? Some believe that security was incredibly lax at the mint during this time period, allowing employees to experiment and smuggle out items or even create their own rarities. Others speculate that certain insider coin dealers had direct access to mint employees and may have arranged for some of these irregularities to be created. One thing is for sure, and that is that this era produced some of the most fascinating, controversial, and valuable Canadian coins that have ever been made. The 1970 Canadian Manitoba gold dollar is more than just a coin. It's an incredibly rare and valuable piece, but comes with an inherent risk that few collectors are willing to take. Would you be brave enough to own one of these, or would you fear it being seized at any moment? Or would you keep it locked away, whispering about it to only your most trusted collector friends? One thing is for sure, this coin will continue to be one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in Canadian numismatics. If you think mint errors are just tiny imperfections that barely make a difference and don't really affect a coin's rarity or value, think again, because what you're about to see is one of the strangest and most fascinating coin blunders to ever come out of the US Mint. This is the story of a United States quarter from the year 1970, struck not on a regular blank quarter planchette, but directly over a fully struck Canadian silver quarter from the era of King George V. This coin is literally a mashup of two different countries' coinage layered together in a way that defies logic. Known as an overstrike, this is the type of error that occurs when a coin is struck over another coin rather than over a blank planchette. Overstrikes are already considered rare on their own, but when they involve two completely different nations' currencies, it ventures into uncharted numismatic territory. In this case, the US Washington Quarter was part of a 1970s proof set, which was produced at the San Francisco Mint. Instead of being struck on the usual copper nickel clad planchette, which normally weighs 5.67 grams and was intended for these Washington quarters, this particular coin was struck on a silver planchette that weighs 5.3 grams, which doesn't match any standard US specification for quarters at that time. When experts examined the coin more closely, they began to see ghostly remnants of a much older design beneath the familiar Washington quarter details. Traces of maple leaves, the Latin inscription Rex ET, which is short for the initials Rex ET IND IMP, meaning King and Emperor of India. These clues all pointed towards one conclusion, and that was a Canadian 25-cent piece from the 1911 to 1936 series. All of these circumstances combined means this isn't just your ordinary minting mistake. It's an accidental time capsule that bridges decades of history from two separate mints. So how could this coin have come into existence? The most widely accepted theory is that this was a rogue mint employee. Some have even considered it could have possibly been an internal prank pulled off by someone inside the US Mint. It's believed that an employee intentionally fed a pre-existing Canadian silver quarter into the minting press alongside regular proof planchettes. Whether they were trying to make a statement, cause a stir, or make a profit for themselves, the result was a proof coin with an official US design concealing but not entirely erasing the George V quarter hiding underneath. Even more fascinating is how this coin actually came to light. It wasn't found in circulation and didn't turn up at auction. It was actually discovered inside an official sealed 1970s US proof set purchased directly from the US Mint, which actually adds legitimacy to the idea that it was deliberately inserted as a prank during production. In recent years, this coin has become somewhat of a numismatic sensation. It was authenticated and graded by NGC as Proof 64, which is considered a somewhat impressive grade for a minting error, but the unique nature of this coin pushes it into a league of its own. This piece is a textbook example of how minting errors can tell complex stories. Not just about production mistakes, but also about the people behind the scenes, the engravers, technicians, and maybe even the mischief makers who could have played a role in this coin's creation. This piece is also a good teaching tool for understanding overstrikes in numismatics. While most collectors might be familiar with double dies or off-center strikes, overstrikes like this are much more rare and harder to identify without a trained eye. Many of the Canadian features were flattened or partially wiped away when the Washington Quarter design was impressed over top, but enough of the details still remain, especially under magnification, to confirm the coin's unusual origins. The weight alone is a giveaway. If you're holding a San Francisco minted US quarter from 1970 that feels oddly heavy or light, that is your first clue to inspect the coin closer. Then there are the visual elements. You want to look for inconsistent relief, ghost images, or legends that don't match or line up with the Washington Quarter design. In a recent auction, this coin had already reached bids of $4,600 US, which is over $6,000 Canadian, and that number will likely go up as more collectors learn about its existence. Its value lies not only in its extreme rarity, but in the sheer curiosity factor, and because it is considered a crossover coin that has a shared origin between two separate nations and two eras in time. It's one-of-a-kind coins like this with a unique history that increase its pedigree, and these will often become the crown jewel of someone's collection. In a way, this coin serves as a perfect reminder of why people collect coins in the first place. It's not always about pristine examples or mint state perfection. Sometimes the most valuable coins are the ones that slipped through the cracks, the mistakes, the anomalies, or happy accidents that leave us scratching our heads and marveling at the randomness and unpredictability in the vast ocean of numismatics and coin collecting. Now, once again, to identify this one-of-a-kind US Washington Quarter struck on a silver Canadian quarter planchette, here's what you need to look for. First, you should check the weight. A regular 1970 San Francisco Mint Washington Quarter should weigh 5.67 grams, but this coin comes in lighter at just 5.3 grams, which is a telltale sign that something is off. Then visually inspect the coin closely. If you can, look under a microscope or zoom in with your phone. You might notice ghostly details peeking through the Washington Quarter design, like faint traces of the maple leaves or possibly the Latin inscription Rex ET. If you see any of these features, that's your clue that this quarter was struck on top of a Canadian 25-cent coin, and signs of Latin Canadian design elements. These visual cues, especially under magnification, will confirm the coin's origin. Even though the Washington Quarter design mostly hides the Canadian one, these features are still visible enough to prove an overstrike error. These kinds of mint errors are extremely rare, so if you're holding a 1970s quarter that feels unusually light or shows any unusual marks or design details, it's worth taking a closer look. This piece is one for the books, and finding it might just be a collector's dream come true. In the year 1967, Canada celebrated its 100th anniversary of the Confederation with a special set of commemorative coins, one of the most iconic being the $1 silver coin, featuring a soaring Canada Goose design. This coin was part of a nationwide design competition. This competition was launched in 1964 by the Canadian Minister of Finance, offering a $2,500 prize for each winning design across each of the different 6 coin denominations. The competition attracted entries from Canadian artists, and the reverse designs were created by renowned artist Alex Colville, while the obverse showcasing Queen Elizabeth II is designed by Arnold Maughan. Alex Colville's Canada Goose design for the silver dollar was chosen for its majestic presence, symbolizing both the vastness of the country and the dynamic nature of its wildlife. The Canada Goose, as one of Canada's most recognized and majestic creatures, was a fitting representation for the dollar coin. The 1967 coins also marked a transitional period for Canadian currency, with some being minted in 80% silver and others being minted in 50%, as the country shifted away from using high silver content in its coin production. It is important to note that the composition change in 1967 only happened for the dimes and quarters. The half dollars and silver dollars were still all produced in 80% silver in the year 1967. Beyond their beautiful design and their historical significance, the 1967 silver dollar is most famous for a specific minting error, the rotated die error, where some coins feature a diving goose due to a 45-degree rotation. The most valuable version of this error is the 180-degree coin alignment error, with high-grade examples of this piece being worth tens of thousands of dollars today. A rotated die error occurs when the design on one side of a coin does not align properly with the design on the other side. In most cases, both sides of a coin should be perfectly aligned when flipped vertically or horizontally, depending on whether they were struck in coin or metal alignment. However, a rotated die error occurs when the dies that are being used to strike the coin are misaligned, which results in one side being rotated in relation to the other. Now, there are two main types of rotated die errors. The first is stable rotation. This happens when one of the dies was installed incorrectly and remains in that position for the production of multiple coins. Each of these coins will have the same degree of rotation. There is also dynamic rotation. This occurs when the dies being used to strike the coins become loose during the production process, causing it to gradually rotate with each strike. As a result, the degree of rotation can vary across the coins from the same production batch. The two different rotated die errors on the 1967 goose dollars would be considered stable rotation, and that is because these goose dollars can only be attributed with these errors if they come with the fixed rotations of either 45 degrees or 180 degrees. That's not saying if you find one and it does have a slight rotation that you may be able to get a slight premium, but usually people want to see the fixed rotations of either 45 degrees or 180 degrees on the 1967 dollars. To measure the rotation of a coin, you need to compare the alignment of the designs on both sides. One of the easiest ways that I suggest to be able to detect a rotated die error is to get some cardboard coin flips or maybe buy some cheap coin slabs, put your coin inside and then look at one side and then flip it over to the other side, and if the other face of the coin is not aligned in the right direction, then you have yourself one of these rotated die errors. The most well-known error on the 1967 silver goose dollars is the diving goose error, where the image of the goose is rotated 45 degrees, giving the impression that the goose is diving down towards the left. While the 45-degree rotation is more notable, the most valuable version of this error is actually the 180-degree or coin alignment error, where the designs on both sides are completely upside down relative to each other. High-grade examples of this 180-degree error can be worth tens of thousands of dollars, making it highly sought after by experienced collectors. The value of these rotated die errors depends on several factors, including the degree of rotation, the coin's condition, and how rare that specific error is. Another rare and highly sought after version of the 1967 Canadian silver goose dollar is the double struck error coin. This error occurs when the coin is struck twice by the dies, leaving a second misaligned impression on both the obverse and the reverse. In the case of the 1967 double struck dollar, the second strike is rotated about 10 to 15 degrees from the original impression, which creates a noticeable double image of both the queen and the goose. Double struck coins are the result of a malfunction in the minting process, where the coin is struck more than once by the dies. In a typical minting process, a blank coin or planchette is placed between the two dies, one for the obverse and one for the reverse, and is struck with immense pressure to create the design. Once struck, the coin is supposed to be ejected from the press and moved along the production line. However, in the case of a double strike, the coin remains in the press after the initial strike and is actually struck again. Now, there are a few reasons that double struck coins can be produced in a minting facility. Ejection mechanism failure. The most common cause is a failure in the mechanism that ejects the coin after the first strike. If the coin doesn't move properly, the press may strike it again, leaving a second impression. Die misalignment. In the case of a double struck error like the 1967 goose dollar, the second strike is misaligned by about 10 to 15 degrees. This means that the coin shifted slightly in position between strikes, causing the two impressions to overlap but not perfectly align. Human error. Occasionally, an operator may unknowingly leave a planchette in the press, causing a double strike. In older minting processes, this could be more common due to manual intervention. Now, some of the visual characteristics for the 1967 double struck goose dollar. On the reverse side of the coin, the most obvious sign of the error is the ghosted or doubled image of the Canada goose. Since the second strike is rotated slightly, it creates a double goose image where the wings, body, and neck appear shifted from the first strike. Also on the obverse, the queen's portrait appears doubled with visible outlines of her head, crown, and facial features from both strikes overlapping. Double struck coins, especially those with visible and significant rotation between strikes, are highly prized by collectors. The rarity and degree of misalignment play a major role in determining their value. In the case of the 1967 double-struck goose dollar, the combination of a unique design and an unusual minting error make these coins a standout piece in Canadian numismatic history. Now, before we get into the values for these different 1967 goose dollar errors, some of the details and specifications of any of these are off and may indicate it is not a legitimate or authentic example. The overall mintage for the 1967 goose dollar is 6,767,496, and all of the three different errors that you can look for are included in that mintage figure. They are composed of 80% silver, 20% copper. They have a weight of 23.33 grams, a diameter of 36.00 millimeters, and a thickness of 2.84 millimeters. The obverse was designed and engraved by Arnold Mockin and Walter Ott, and the reverse by Alex Colville and Myron Cook. The edge of the coin is reeded and it has a diaxis and metal alignment, as is the standard for most Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, just to give you guys an idea and a base price, I will start off with the regular 1967 goose dollar. It can be worth around $25 for an MS60 and all the way up to $500 for an MS66, but it is very rare that you are going to find these in that high of a grade. Usually when you're buying these in scrap condition, honestly, you're going to pay anywhere from $20 to $25. If you're lucky, you might be able to get them for a few dollars cheaper. So if you do find one and it's in an MS60, or if you can buy one for $25 for an MS60, you're probably getting a pretty good deal. Now, the first of the different varieties that we will discuss is actually the most rare and valuable, and that is the 1967 in coin alignment, meaning that the goose design on the reverse and the portrait of Queen Elizabeth will be rotated 180 degrees in relation to the reverse side. If you can find one of these in the coin alignment, it is the rarest and most valuable of all the 1967 goose dollar varieties. It can be worth around $5,000 for an MS60 and all the way up to $17,500 for an MS66. If you did find one and it scored the epic MS67 mark, you could easily be talking a $25,000, $30,000 coin. Next up, we'll discuss the most notable of the different 1967 errors, and that is the diving goose dollar. Now, to identify the 1967 diving goose dollar, you want to look at the reverse of the coin and take a look at the goose, and then you want to flip over to the obverse. And if it looks like the goose design on the reverse and then the portrait of the queen on the obverse are rotated 45 degrees in relation to each other, that means that the goose on the reverse will also be diving down towards the bottom left with its beak pointing down in that direction. Then you have the diving goose variety. It can be worth around $800 for an MS60 and all the way up to $2,100 for an MS65. If it did grade any higher, you could see a decent price jump. You could easily be talking a $3,000 to $5,000 coin, and that is for the Diving Goose 1967 silver dollar. Now, last but not least, we are going to discuss the double struck 1967. Now, to identify this, it should be pretty simple. It will basically look like the coin was struck twice. There should be two impressions, and they will be slightly rotated on both the obverse and reverse. I will leave an example of exactly what it looks like on the screen right now. But if you can identify the double struck example of the 1967 goose dollar, It can be worth around $1,000 for an MS-60 and all the way up to $2,700 for an MS-66. So actually a little bit more rare and valuable than the Diamond Goose dollar. It's flown under the radar a little bit, no pun intended. The Diamond Goose dollar is definitely the most notable of these heirs, and you probably have the best chance of being able to find one of those, but you should definitely keep your eyes open because you never know what you can find if you are searching through your coin collection, your pocket change, or maybe you make a scrap silver purchase. To get a good understanding of the rare and elusive 2000p Canadian dime, we first have to travel back to the year 2000, which was a time of optimism and celebration as Canada embraced the dawn of a new millennium. Amid this excitement, the Canadian Mint introduced a coin into circulation that would catch the attention of collectors and coin roll hunters, and that is the 2000p Canadian dime. This coin features the typical iconic blue nose schooner design on its reverse side. The blue nose schooner design is a tribute to Canada's rich maritime heritage, and the blue nose itself, a legendary racing ship celebrated for its speed and elegance, has become a symbol of national pride. The design first appeared on Canadian 10-cent coins in the year 1937 and has remained the standard dime design until present day. The blue nose design has endured for nearly a century as a hallmark of Canadian coinage, admired by collectors the world over. Now, what sets the 2000p Canadian dime apart is not actually its design, but it's the story behind its creation. This coin holds a unique place in Canadian numismatic history as one of the first dimes to feature the P mint or composition mark, a symbol that marks significant changes in both the Canadian Mint's operations and the composition of Canadian coins. The P mint or composition mark, which is located just beneath the bust of Queen Elizabeth II, signifies that the coin was struck using the Canadian Mint's new multiply plated steel technology. The transition from a nickel-based alloy to a new steel core in Canadian coins was a pivotal moment for coin production, not just in Canada, but for the entire world. The Mint aimed at reducing production costs and enhancing the durability of Canada's circulating coins. Now you might be wondering what actually makes the 2000p dime so special. Well, unlike its common counterparts, this coin actually wasn't intended for widespread circulation. While 2000p Canadian nickels were released for circulation with a very low mintage figure of around 5 million, the dimes and quarters featuring the P mint mark were not officially issued for circulation until the year 2001. This makes any 2000p dimes that exist today an accidental release or perhaps the result of testing conducted by the Mint. Some of these coins may have slipped into the wilds of circulation through vending machine companies testing the new compositions or possibly through other experimental purposes. Regardless, the 2000p Canadian dimes were not meant to end up in public hands, and that is where their story began. The exact number of 2000p Canadian dimes produced remains somewhat of a mystery, but it's widely believed that there are no more than 250 of these coins that escaped into the wilds of circulation. This coin's incredible rarity combined with the fascinating circumstances of its release definitely makes it one of Canada's holy grail coins. I have known coin roll hunters who have found coins very similar to these, and there was a lot of chaos at the Canadian Mint around the year 2000, with the change of composition and circulating coins and also the upcoming Millennium Quarter series. Usually during periods of heavy workloads and changes, a few legendary coins will come into existence, and the 2000p Canadian dime is a prime example. Now, to identify one of these rare gems, all you need to do is look for a little P mint or composition mark beneath the Queen's bust on the obverse side of the coin, which was put there to indicate the coin's new steel composition. The reverse will have the typical blue nose schooner design. The common regular issued dimes in the year 2000 will not have the P mint mark, but they will have the same blue nose schooner design with Queen Elizabeth's bust. There were also sets featuring 2000 dated dimes issued from the Winnipeg Mint, and they were issued with a small W mint mark to the bottom right of Queen Elizabeth's bust. These were not intended for circulation and are only worth slightly more than business or circulation strikes, but they are more rare and have fairly low mintage figures. So if you ever find a coin in your pocket change with a W mint mark, you should definitely still hold on to it, but it's actually the P mint mark on the 2000 Canadian dimes that you are looking for. The 2000p Canadian dime is not classified as an heir. Instead, its appeal and value lies in its extreme scarcity and unique backstory. Unlike the infamous 1969 large date dime, which is regarded as the most rare and valuable Canadian circulation dime, the 2000p dime stands out for its rarity and its connection to a pivotal moment in Canadian coinage history. When it comes to value, these coins can fetch impressive sums depending on their condition and the provenance given with the piece. While they might not make you an instant millionaire, their numismatic significance ensures that they are worth far more than their face value. In the hands of an eager collector, these dimes can easily command prices in the hundreds or even thousands of dollars depending on their state of preservation. I just wanted to give you guys an important side note. The Canadian Mint did issue limited proof-like sets in the year 1999 featuring the P Mint mark. These coins were part of a planned release with a mintage figure of around 20,000, and while they are collectible in their own right, their story is distinct from the 2000p Canadian dime. The real allure of the 2000p dime lies in its accidental release, likely tied to testing purposes, which makes it far more rare and more exciting for collectors. But if you do ever find a 1999 Canadian coin in your pocket change with a P mint mark, you should still definitely hold on to it because it is worth more than the face value. Now, some of the details and specifications for this piece, if any of these are off, it may indicate that it is not a legitimate or authentic example. The composition for the 2000p Canadian dime is 92% steel, 5.5% copper, and 2.5% nickel, which is considered multiply plated steel. It has a weight of 1.75 grams, a diameter of 18.03 millimeters, a thickness of 1.22 millimeters. The designers for the obverse were Dorota Padre Hunt and Augo Aran, and the designer for the reverse was Emmanuel Hahn. The edge of the coin should be reeded, it should be magnetic, and it should also have a die axis and metal alignment, which is the standard for Canadian, British, and Australian coins. Now, what do you say we get into the current market values for the 2000p Canadian dime? Just to give you guys a reference point, if you find a 1999p Canadian dime, whether you pull it out of the set or you find it in your pocket change, it means it will have come from the testing set that was issued in the year 1999. This set was limited to a mintage figure of around 20,000, so it makes the value a little bit more than face. If you were to find one of these 1999p Canadian dimes, it can be worth around $30 for an NBU 66 to 67. So it is obviously worth much more than face value when it gets a high grade, but still not super rare or valuable. The regular issue Canadian 2000 dime without the P mint mark can be worth around $15 for an NBU 66 or a brilliant uncirculated 66 for the business strike. Now, if you were to find a 2000p Canadian dime in your pocket change, so it's pretty beat up and worn, you can easily get anywhere from $50 to a couple $100 for it. Collectors definitely want these things to fill their albums out, and they are pretty sought after. Now, as we start to get into the NBU territory, meaning brilliant uncirculated, it can be worth around $700 for an NBU 60, and the maximum price currently this coin is appraised for is around $3,280 for an NBU 66. If it were to grade any higher, you might see a pretty good price jump. We could easily be talking a $5,000 to $10,000 dime. When it comes to coin collecting or coin roll hunting, Canadian dimes, unfortunately there isn't too much to look for, so this 2000p definitely adds some flavor and spice. These coins, although extremely legendary and rare, are out there and they can be found. Whether you're just casually looking through your pocket change or you go to the bank and you get a box of coin rolls or maybe even just a few loose rolls to search through, these things are out there and some of them are unaccounted for and they are just waiting to be discovered. The 1967 Canadian Rabbit Nickel is a fascinating coin for collectors, especially due to the rare rotated die air, which can be found with rotations of either 90 or 180 degrees. This particular error is most commonly discovered in Canadian proof sets from the year 1967, but it is also possible to find it on regular issue business strike coins. However, it's super important to note that the most recognized and highly valued versions of the 1967 rabbit nickels with rotated die errors originate from proof sets. Now, to understand the nuances between different types of coin strikes, it's essential to distinguish between proof-like, which is known as PL, brilliant uncirculated, which is known as NBU, and business strike coins, which are known as mint state or MS. Proof-like or PL coins are not intended for circulation. They are struck and sold by the Canadian Mint in special packaging. Despite usually having the same composition as coins produced for circulation, PL coins are set apart by their superior finish, which includes a mirror-like surface and sharp details due to their high-quality strike. The packaging is a key element here because it helps preserve their pristine condition. If these PL coins are removed from their protective envelope or case, it becomes more challenging to differentiate them from uncirculated or business strike coins. The most valuable 1967 rabbit nickels with rotated die errors are usually found from the Canadian PL sets from the year 1967. Now, there are also brilliant uncirculated coins, which are classified as NBU. These coins share some similarities with PL coins. They are also not intended for circulation and are struck and sold by the mint in special packaging. The term NBU started being used by third-party grading companies and other references beginning in the year 1977, essentially replacing the term proof-like. NBU coins are characterized by their pristine condition. Similar to proof-like coins, if NBU classified coins are removed from their original packaging, it can be extremely hard to distinguish them from regular circulation issues. While the NBU designation came after the year 1967, understanding this terminology will help you understand the types of high-quality strikes that you can look for when it comes to collecting or coin roll hunting. Now, business strike coins are the standard coins produced for everyday use and circulation. These coins are typically minted in large quantities, distributed to the general public, and it is intended to be used as currency for everyday transactions. The condition, finish, and quality of business strike coins will typically not be as high as PL or even NBU coins because they are meant to withstand the rigors of daily handling and circulation. Now, although it is not considered as valuable or rare as the proof-like version, this rotated die error can also appear on regular business strike issues on 1967 Canadian rabbit nickels. However, these examples typically do not command as high a value as those from the proof sets due to their lesser finish and the higher likelihood of wear and tear. The 1967 Canadian rabbit nickels are a significant piece of Canadian numismatic history, both for their commemorative value and also for the rare rotated die errors that make certain specimens highly sought after by collectors. This coin was issued to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Confederation of Canada, a landmark event that prompted the Canadian government to commission special designs for the Canadian coin denominations from the penny through to the silver dollar for that year. A few years prior, in 1964, the Canadian Minister of Finance, Walter L. Gordon, announced a competition inviting artists, sculptors, and designers residing in Canada or Canadians living abroad to submit special designs for the new centennial coinage. The competition offered a $2,500 first prize for the winning designs in each of the different 6 coinage denominations. A distinguished panel of judges was appointed to select the winning designs. The winning designs were chosen from submissions received by the competition's closing date on March 31st, 1965, and the winners were announced in the Mint Report of 1966. Alex Colville of Sackville, New Brunswick was selected for all reverses of the 1967 centennial coinage, and Arnold Mockin designed the obverses featuring Queen Elizabeth II. The 1967 5-cent coin, affectionately known as the rabbit nickel, features a design by Alex Colville of a hopping rabbit, symbolizing wildlife of Canada and capturing the spirit of centennial celebrations. Unlike the dimes, quarters, half dollars, and silver dollars, which were struck in silver with some in 50% and some in 80%, and only 80% for the half dollars and silver dollars, the rabbit nickels were composed of the usual composition of 99.9% nickel. A particularly intriguing aspect of the 1967 rabbit nickel is the occurrence of these rotated die errors. This error results when the obverse and reverse dies are misaligned when the coins are being struck, leading to the images on the two sides of the coin not being correctly oriented. The two most notable degrees of rotation are 90 degrees and 180 degrees. Now, the errors on the 1967 Canadian rabbit nickels are most commonly found in proof sets from 1967, which were specially minted for collectors with higher quality strikes and finishes. To identify a 90-degree rotation, hold the coin with the obverse or the queen's portrait facing upright. If you then rotate or spin the coin around and the rabbit design appears to be on a 90-degree angle rather than upright, then you have the 90-degree rotated die error. This means that the rabbit design will be oriented horizontally either to the left or right. To identify the 180-degree error, the rabbit design will be upside down when the obverse or the queen is upright. This means that the rabbit will be directly inverted in comparison to the obverse side of the coin. One of the easiest ways I can suggest to identify this misaligned or rotated die error is to actually put your rabbit nickel into a cardboard coin flip. And then if you flip over to the obverse side and make sure that the queen is facing up, and then you flip over to the rabbit side and it is not oriented in the same direction, then you have yourself the rotated die. That's usually how I check them. Your best chance of being able to find one of these 1967 rotated die PL rabbit nickels is out of a Canadian proof-like set from the year 1967, but that doesn't mean that you can't ever find one in the wild. But if these coins are removed from their original protective packaging, it will be much more difficult and challenging to distinguish them from a regular uncirculated business strike. The rotated die error found on the PL version of these coins is particularly valuable due to the limited number produced and their enhanced quality. While the rotated die error is most recognized and valuable in proof sets, it can also occur in regular issue business strike coins, which were minted for everyday circulation. Business strike coins will typically have a less refined finish compared to PL coins due to the higher speed and larger quantities in which they are produced. Although finding a rotated die error on a business strike version of one of these 1967 rabbit nickels is not as valuable as one from the proof set, it still adds a premium to the coin due to the novelty and rarity of the error. These coins, whether found in proof sets or in your pocket change, represent a fascinating intersection of artistry, history, and the meticulous process of coin minting. Collectors highly prize these coins not only for their unique errors, but also for their place in commemorating Canada's centennial, marking an era of national pride and cultural celebration. The combination of Alex Colville's iconic rabbit design and the potential for discovering a rare rotated die error makes these 1967 rabbit nickels a compelling addition to any coin collection. Before we get into the values for the different versions of the 1967 rotated die rabbit nickel, some of the details and specifications of any of these are off and may indicate that it is not a legitimate example. The overall mintage for the 1967 Canadian rabbit nickel is 36,876,574. It is composed of pure nickel. It has a weight of 4.54 grams. It has a current melt value of 12 cents, a diameter of 21.21 millimeters. The standard die axis for 1967 nickels will be in metal alignment, which is the standard for Canadian, British, and Australian coins, but if it has a rotated die error, it may appear more like an American coin, or either the queen or the rabbit will not be oriented in the same direction. Now, the obverse of this coin was designed by Arnold Mockin and the reverse by Alex Colville. Now, what do you say we get into some of the values for the 1967 Canadian rotated die rabbit nickels? I'm going to be giving you guys the values for the PL versions of this coin, which is the proof-like. Now, just to give you guys an idea, if you pull one of these 1967 rabbit nickels out of a proof-like set and it doesn't have the rotated die error, it can only be worth around $1.50 for a PL63, and it has a maximum value currently of around $35. So not super valuable even on the high end. Now, if you're able to identify the 180-degree rotated die error, which will mean that the rabbit and queen are oriented in the opposite direction of each other, it can be worth around $1,000 for a PL64, and it has a current maximum evaluated price of around $1,900 for a PL66. If it graded any higher, you could easily see a $2,500 nickel. And that is for the 180-degree rotated die error. And then last but not least, we have the 90-degree rotated die error. Now, to identify this one, if you flip over to the obverse and the queen is facing upright, and then you spin over to the reverse, and then the rabbit is facing to the side, then you have yourself the 90-degree rotated die error. Now, there's currently only one evaluated price for this coin, and it is around $1,000 for a PL64. Not quite as valuable as the 180-degree error, but if you are able to find either of these and they have the 90 or 180 degree, they are extremely rare and valuable. In most cases, if you do find a rotated die on a business strike version of the 1967 Canadian nickel, it won't be quite as significant as a 90 or 180 degree rotation. It will only be slightly off axis, but if you are able to identify a 90 or 180 degree rotation off of a coin you find in your pocket change, I definitely suggest sending it in, because it may have even been pulled out of a proof-like set at some point. Now, what do you guys think about the 1967 rotated die rabbit nickel? What would you do if you ever found one of these, or if you ever have found any of the coins that I discussed in this video? Please let me know down in the comments. I would love to know. Also, I would really appreciate if you guys would smash that thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and also ring that bell notification so you can stay up to date with my new content as it is being released. But I think that is pretty much going to do it for this one, folks. So until the next one, everybody, peace out and have